Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. As always, it is so good to be back here again with a new video. And if it's your first time watching, hello and welcome. Why don't you stick around to see what kind of shocking true crime story I have for you today. And also please do subscribe to the channel for more true crime content. Alright, I hope you guys are good and that you've had a good week so far. And for this week's case, we're going to be talking about a very heartbreaking case in my opinion, because it shows that in this day and age, there are still backward-minded people who are hell-bent on ruining lives. And in this case, I will be talking about murder, sexual assault, and also hate crime. So viewer discretion is advised. But right now, sit back, relax, and let me tell you all about the case of David Olyne. David Olyne was born on September 24th in 1991, and he grew up and attended school in the small town of Wollaston in the Northern Cape in South Africa. And from a very young age, David always knew that he was attracted to men, and he accepted this about himself, and he started living his life that way. And even his family was very supportive of this, and they were very happy that he was being true to himself. But as much as David was being true to himself and happy about how he was, there were still some people who would make fun of him and call him names just for being himself. Then once David graduated high school, he decided to move out of his town of Wollaston, and he moved to a town called Sirius in the Western Cape. And he was still in his early 20s at the time, and this is where he wanted to build his new life. And when he got to Sirius, he was more welcomed in that town because there were a lot of people who were also a part of the LGBTQ community. But as much as he had people who made him feel welcomed, there were also people who just wanted to spread hate towards the members of the LGBTQ community in that town of Sirius. But in spite of all that, David was determined to lead his own life, to live it the way he wanted to, and to also lead his own path. He lived with some family of his in the suburb of Bella Vista, and he also enjoyed taking part in the occasional drag queen pageant that would happen in that town, and he also worked at the family food and meat market. He and his manager by the name of Heather Miller ended up becoming very good friends, and Heather described David as a very jolly person who always wanted to spread happiness in the workplace, and he loved singing whenever he was working. Now, there isn't a lot of information out there of what actually happened that led to the crime, but I did get my hands on as much information as I possibly could, because even the information given by the prosecutor of this case came from a group of teenagers whose involvement and version of events of what actually happened are a bit questionable too. But we do have to talk about it, so we'll have to work with what we have. On the evening of March 22nd in 2014, a group of teenagers aged between 14 and 18 were drinking at a dam near Bella Vista, and this was a well-known place for teenagers to come and hang out without being eyed on by the grown-ups. The teenagers claimed that as they were still chilling and drinking, they were approached by a man by the name of Christo Unker, who was 28 years old at the time. And apparently the boys knew Christo from the community because he was also well known as a drug user who had been arrested in the past for having illegal drugs in his possession. These teenage boys claimed that Christo came to them that night and he was asking them if they wanted to see him kill a morphie. Now, a morphie is a derogatory term used in South Africa by people who are homophobic towards homosexual people or any other person who might not identify as a heterosexual person. And then the teenagers said that they followed Christo. They decided to follow him to wherever he was going because they were curious to see what he was actually talking about. And also because they thought he was just crazy and they thought he was just pumped on drugs. And as they kept following him, he led them to an abandoned gas station that hadn't been used up in a long time. And when they got there, they found someone who was tied up in wire and he looked very beaten up because all over his face and all over his head, he was covered in blood and he was just motionless on the ground. Then the boys claimed that Christo took a brick and he started hitting this man with this brick over his head and the rest of his body over and over again. And then after all the punching and the kicking that he did to this person, he decided to take a very big rock and he hit the man on the head with the rock. And then after that, he started putting branches all over this man's body, and then he wanted to set his body on fire. The teenage boys said that even though it took a few attempts for the man's body to actually catch on fire, eventually his clothes started burning up, and this man wasn't screaming. He wasn't moving. He was just lying there unresponsive to whatever was happening to him. So obviously something terrible was happening here. And these boys said that all they could do was just watch, and they couldn't do anything. And they were also afraid of leaving because they were actually wondering what Crystal would do if they decided to leave him there. So they just sat there and watched. And then it was discovered that one of the boys, while this whole thing was happening, decided to take out his phone at some point, and he took a video of the whole thing. And then after that, once the man's body was seriously burning up, that's when they all decided to walk away and head back to the dam before they went back home. Then on the next day of March 23rd in 2014, David's family started noticing that he hadn't come back yet because his bed was still neat and it was still empty. And this is when they started to wonder where he was, because he never came back from his night out. And whenever he went out, he would always come back home. But if he wasn't going to come back, he would always let his family know. But this time, no one knew anything about this. He didn't tell anyone that he wouldn't be coming back. The teenage boys decided to go back to the gas station because they were now asking themselves if what they saw was actually real, or if maybe the alcohol was just playing tricks on them. Then when they arrived at the gas station, they saw that it was all actually real, because right in front of their eyes was a man who was just lying on the ground who looked very burned up. And this time they claimed that he was naked from the waist down. The teenage boys then said after they saw that this actually happened, they decided to walk around looking for any adult to report what they had just seen, to report what actually happened. And the police were called by a woman who lived in that community, but she said these boys were not looking for anyone to report this to, because before she discovered the body, she saw the boys calmly walking away from the crime scene, and they were just talking about some very concerning things. So she also got curious about what they were walking away from. She also said that she decided to approach the boys and also interrogate them about what they were talking about. And this is when one of the boys told her to go and check it out for herself. Then after she went to the gas station and found out that there was a dead body at that gas station, that's when she decided to immediately call the police. And when the police got to the gas station, they immediately started treating the whole thing as a crime scene. And by this time, the people of Bella Vista were already talking about how a dead body had been discovered at that gas station. And this worried David's family and friends, because they knew that on his way back home, he would have used that way past the gas station to come back home. And now people are saying a dead body had been found around the same route. So now they were very concerned about what they were hearing. The face of the body had been burned to a point where this body could not be facially identified. And David's family even contacted the police, saying that they were concerned about the body that had been discovered because their loved one never came back home from the previous night before the body was discovered. But they still couldn't go and actually see the body because they wouldn't just be able to look at it and identify it as David's body. But even though facial recognition was a bit of a stretch, one of David's friends decided to come forward, and she wanted to go and see if she wouldn't be able to maybe identify anything on the body that could tell them if it's David's body or not. But the face was completely charred. Fragments of the hair that were found on the body, still remaining on the body, were used to identify who this body belonged to. And when the DNA results came back, unfortunately they confirmed that this body was the body of 23-year-old David Olyne. Now, the investigation of this case wasn't really done well. As a matter of fact, it received a lot of criticism. And even though the police managed to find the teenage boys, leading to them also finding Crystal Unker after the boys identified him as the culprit, somehow the investigation ended up getting very messed up and it ended up going off the wrong way. A few days after the murder, the video that one of the boys took when David was being murdered on that night of March 22nd was now circulating around the community, and people could see exactly what happened to him. And even his friends and family had to watch how David suffered on that day. And when some of the friends and family of David tried to tell the police about this video, allegedly some of the detectives even refused to look at the video. And when they finally decided that they had to look at it, unfortunately by then the boys had deleted the video. And also, if you think about it, the police could have gone to extra measures to try to recover this deleted video, because we all know that they have the means to recover even things that seem to be deleted from a phone or a computer, especially in the modern age. But it's highly likely that they did not explore this option, and they only took the word of 7 teenage boys who were heavily intoxicated that night. And even though these boys claimed that their only part in this was being involuntary witnesses to the murder, the people who knew David and the family as well as some LGBTQ and human rights activist organizations found it very hard to believe that this was all there was to what happened to David. And there was a journalist by the name of Mr. Pretorius, and he decided to go speak with the teenage boys after the murder had happened. And he managed to paint quite a picture of what happened to David that night. And this happened after he decided to approach the boys while they were playing outside so he could talk to them and try to get a bit more information out of them. These boys spoke with the journalist for quite a bit, and what he took away with him from this entire discussion he had with them was how strangely calm they were about this whole thing. Now, he expected them to be a little bit more traumatized or at least scared to talk about what happened. But the more they talked, the more it just seemed like the whole thing was just another Tuesday to them, like they didn't just witness the murder of an actual human being that night. Mr. Pretorius ended up thinking that maybe this had to do with the environment that these kids grew up in, that they were so used to violence that something like this just didn't affect them anymore. But new evidence that would end up coming to light ended up showing that Mr. Pretorius could have been wrong about his deductions of these boys, because the new evidence would end up suggesting that the man who was believed to have been the one who committed this crime, Crystal Unker, could have possibly not committed this crime by himself. David was described as a relatively strong young man, and this means that it would have been a bit challenging for just one person to overpower him, and this came from the people who knew him. They found it hard to believe that David could have been subdued just by one person, but the police, on the other hand, believed that he was hit with a brick from the back of the head, and this caused him to fall unconscious, which means it became quite easy for him to be completely overpowered. And even though this theory is entirely possible, the people who knew David just didn't believe that this was the case. They were adamant that there were more people than just one involved in this case. It was also said that even a family member of Crystal Unker came forward with some information regarding the case, but the police turned this person away because they said his statements would not be reliable since he is a family member of the suspect. It was also discovered that a lot of other witnesses who were interviewed by the police were only interviewed because the family members of David pushed for them to be interviewed, and some of them were only interviewed 6 months after the murder took place. So like I said, the investigation of this case was not really well done, because how would you interview someone about something that happened 6 months ago? I mean, the chances of them still remembering every detail with precision are very slim at that point. But that's how the investigation was carried out. And no matter how much the teenage boys testified that David was only attacked because of his sexual orientation, the police and even the prosecution of this case did not treat this case as it obviously was. They did not see it as a hate crime. And when Crystal Unker appeared in court for the first time, his list of charges was read out. And when it was, a lot of people were also shocked to find out that he was also now being charged with rape. And this came from the fact that when an autopsy was done, it was found out that David had been sexually assaulted before his death because there was semen that was found in and around his anal region. Crystal Unker was denied bail. Then in June of 2014, that's when his trial took place. However, this time when his list of charges was read out again, this time the charge of sexual assault was not included, and there was not any much of an explanation for this. The friends and family of David attended the trial that day to face the man who did this, and also the activist organizations also went by to support the family and to support David. Crystal Unker's family also attended the trial, and some of his friends as well, because they believed that he was innocent of this crime. The only thing they agreed on with David's family and friends was that there could have been other people involved in this, but they believed that Crystal was not one of them. Crystal's mother spoke to a journalist, and she said that she didn't believe that her son committed this crime. She said that he didn't have the intellectual capacity to carry out this kind of crime. She also said that she saw the clothes that Crystal was wearing on that night, and they didn't have anything to indicate that he could have done anything like this. There were no blood or anything like that to physically say that he was involved in this. The trial took about 20 months until it finally came to an end on the 21st of January in 2016. And the reason it took so long was because there were a lot of postponements that were taken in this case. But eventually, Crystal Unker was found guilty of the murder of David Olyne. The sentencing was set to take place a month later on February 22nd in 2016. But this ended up taking another 5 postponements to happen. The judge also commented as well that the reason this was happening so much was because of how inefficient the South African justice system can be. And one of the reasons for this postponement was that the judge put in an order for Crystal Unker to undergo some psychological evaluations. And this was so it could be determined if he really didn't have the intellectual capacity to carry out this crime. Because ever since his mother made those kind of claims that he was not intellectual enough to do this, the judge became quite concerned, so he wanted to be absolutely sure that this was the case or not. Another reason for the postponement was that it was noticed that Crystal Unker was having quite a difficult time testifying in the trial. It was discovered that he had literacy issues, and even though he could still read a little bit, he still couldn't write down his own name. This, of course, could be possibly caused by the below-average IQ that his mother claimed he had. If it was true that he had a below-average IQ, this would be taken into consideration when his sentence is handed down. Then finally, on October 12th in 2016, the sentencing of this trial took place, and it was as if this day was chosen by the stars for the LGBTQ community, because 18 years prior, in 1998, on October 12th, a young man by the name of Matthew Shepard was murdered only because of his sexual orientation. He was beaten, tortured, and then he was left for dead in Wyoming in the United States. And he was taken to the hospital on the 6th of October in 1998. However, he ended up losing his life in hospital on October 12th in 1998. And when the judge of David's case spoke out at this point, he agreed that even though in South Africa there isn't a law that would pass this as a hate crime, this was very much a hate crime in his eyes. The judge also believed that yes, Crystal Unker was responsible for this murder, but he also believed that he didn't commit this crime by himself. And I really look forward to finding out what you guys think about this in the comments. Then finally, after the judge looked at all the factors brought forth about this case, including the confirmation from psychological evaluations that said indeed Crystal Unger had below average IQ, and the fact that this was the first time he was being convicted for a crime of violence, Crystal Unger was sentenced to 17 years in prison. And to this day, there hasn't been any further arrests that were made related to this case. I would like to know what you guys think about this case. And I know that if any of you watching this are part of the LGBTQ community, you're going to feel very affected by this case. And if that's the case, then feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. I promise you there will be no judgment here on my channel. I will make sure of it. But yeah, guys, that was the case of David Olyne, a young man who just wanted to live his life being true to himself. But unfortunately, we live in a world too evil to let that happen. My deepest sympathies go to his family and friends, and wherever he is, I hope David is resting in peace. And that is all that I have for you guys on this case. Please, again, do let me know what you think about it in the comments. I will be looking forward to interacting with you guys. And also, if you enjoyed watching, please do me a big favor and press the like button so my channel could reach out to more people. I would seriously appreciate that. And also, thank you guys for hanging out with me again today. As always, I do appreciate you taking time out of your day to support my channel. And again, if it's your first time watching, if you are new here, please be part of the family and subscribe to the channel for more true crime content. That being said, I will see you guys in the next video. So until then, take care of yourselves, enjoy the rest of your day, and cheers.